The arrogant project manager fired the old concrete worker in front of the entire construction crew on a Tuesday morning in November. He told the man that he was nothing but a blunt tool that had outlived its usefulness and that tools which no longer performed their function belonged in the trash. What the project manager did not know was that the old man standing in the mud with his scratched yellow hard hat in his concrete-stained hands was the only person on that site who understood exactly why the billion-dollar building behind them was going to fail and how to stop it. Marcus Webb was 34 years old and he had never in his professional life made a decision he was not completely certain about. He ran the Centurion Tower project, the most expensive and most visible construction project in the city, with the absolute conviction of a man who believed that confidence and competence were the same thing. The Centurion Tower was going to be 72 floors of glass and steel and imported stone, a mixed-use residential and commercial skyscraper that had been covered in architecture magazines before a single foundation stone was poured. Marcus had been appointed project manager at 32 and he wore that appointment like a crown. He wore his white hard hat instead of the standard yellow because he had ordered custom white hard hats for himself to distinguish himself visually from the labor teams. He wore slim-fit suits to the site because he believed that how you presented yourself determined how people responded to your authority, and he had never once poured concrete or carried steel or read a soil report with his hands in the earth. Arthur Cole was 67 years old and he had been working in concrete and structural inspection for 41 years. He had seen buildings go up in 14 countries. He had worked on bridges and tunnels and hospital foundations and airport terminals, and he had developed over 4 decades the particular intuition that comes only from a lifetime of putting your hand on concrete and listening to what it told you. He had semi-retired 3 years earlier and had taken the Centurion Tower concrete inspection job not because he needed the money but because his wife had told him that sitting at home was making him irritable, and because a building of this scale was the kind of thing a man like Arthur found genuinely interesting. He was not a dramatic man, he did not make speeches and he did not perform, and when he noticed something that concerned him he wrote it down in a small notebook that he kept in the breast pocket of his orange vest. It was in the 4th week of the deep foundation work that Arthur first noticed the numbers that did not sit right with him. The eastern load-bearing columns were being poured according to a foundation design that assumed a uniform soil density across the entire eastern quadrant of the site, but Arthur had been watching the concrete behavior during the pours, and something in the way the eastern section was settling was inconsistent with uniform soil. He had seen this pattern before on a bridge approach in the Philippines in 1998 and he knew what it meant. He spent 2 weeks checking his observations against the soil survey data, and what he found was that a secondary soil survey had flagged a potential clay lens formation under the eastern quadrant, a clay lens that under sustained vertical load would compress unevenly and create differential settlement, and if the building was occupied when that happened the consequences would be measured not in money but in lives. Arthur wrote everything down carefully in his small notebook and he requested a meeting with the project manager. Marcus kept him waiting for 4 days. When Arthur finally stood in the site office and explained what he had found, Marcus listened for approximately 90 seconds before interrupting. Marcus said the foundation design was produced by one of the most respected structural engineering firms in the country and that he was not in the habit of taking soil advice from concrete inspectors. Arthur said he was not offering soil advice, he was offering 41 years of observational experience, and asked Marcus to look at the notebook. Marcus did not look at the notebook. He told Arthur that the meeting was over. Arthur submitted his concerns through the formal documentation process and received no response for 3 weeks. He requested a second meeting. This time Marcus came to find him on the site floor in front of 12 members of the labor crew and told Arthur in a voice loud enough for all of them to hear that his submission reflected exactly the kind of thinking he expected from a man whose entire professional framework was built on intuition rather than engineering, science and data. He told Arthur that a concrete inspector was a very specific and very limited tool, and that tools which exceeded their function created problems rather than solving them, and that he had decided the most efficient solution was to remove the tool from the site entirely. He said, "Get your things and get off my site." Arthur looked at Marcus for a long moment and did not raise his voice. He said, "I hope I am wrong." He picked up his small notebook from the ground and walked off the site. Marcus turned to the watching crew and said, "That is what happens when someone mistakes length of service for quality of judgment." The Centurion Tower continued to rise. By the end of January it had reached the 23rd floor and the steel was going up quickly and it looked magnificent from the street, and the architecture publications sent photographers and the investors held a progress reception on the 12th floor. In the second week of February a crack appeared in the concrete of the eastern stairwell on the 4th floor. The site engineer documented it and noted it as within acceptable parameters, and Marcus was told about it in a 3-line email which he read and archived in the third week of February. 3 more cracks appeared on the eastern face, and one of them was not hairline. On Saturday morning, the city's Department of Buildings received an anonymous complaint about potential structural irregularities at the Centurion Tower site. The complaint contained detailed technical language about clay lens formation, differential settlement, and secondary soil survey data. The Department of Buildings was required by law to respond to all structural complaints within 48 hours. On Monday morning, when Marcus arrived at the site, there were 2 government vehicles parked at the entrance, and 4 men in yellow hard hats with city identification lanyards were already inside the building conducting an inspection. The lead inspector's name was Dr. Raymond Chen. Dr. Chen was 58 years old and had spent 30 years in structural failure analysis and prevention. He had testified before congressional committees and written papers that were required reading in graduate structural engineering programs across the country. Marcus introduced himself, and Dr. Chen said they had received a complaint about possible differential settlement in the eastern foundation columns and were conducting a mandatory assessment. Marcus said the foundation had been approved by the city planning authority. Dr. Chen said he was aware of that and asked Marcus to let his team work. The assessment took 6 hours. At 3 in the afternoon, Dr. Chen asked Marcus to come with him to the eastern face of the 4th floor. He showed Marcus the cracks. He showed Marcus his team's measurements of the eastern foundation column positions. He showed Marcus the soil pressure readings his team had taken that morning. Then he showed Marcus a page from a report. The report was a secondary soil survey conducted 18 months ago which had flagged a clay lens formation under the eastern quadrant with a recommendation for additional load-bearing measures in the eastern foundation columns. Marcus looked at the page. Dr. Chen said the complaint they had received had identified this exact document and this exact issue with a level of technical precision that his team found remarkable, and asked if Marcus knew who might have submitted it. Marcus did not answer. Dr. Chen said the eastern section of the building needed to be suspended immediately and the foundation columns assessed and most likely reinforced before construction could continue. He said in plain language that the building was not safe to build on and that if the issue had not been caught, the consequences at full occupancy would have been catastrophic. Marcus stood on the 4th floor of his 72-floor building and looked at the cracks in the eastern wall and felt something he had never felt before in his professional life, which was the very specific and very cold sensation of understanding that he had been completely and consequentially wrong. Dr. Chen's phone rang. He answered it, stepped away, spoke for a moment, and then turned back. He said the man who submitted the complaint had identified himself and was willing to come to the site to consult on remediation options. Marcus said, "Who is it?" Dr. Chen looked at Marcus with the particular expression of a man who already knows the answer to a question but wants the other person to arrive at it themselves. He said his name is Arthur Cole. He said Arthur Cole spent 15 years as the chief structural concrete analyst for the National Foundation Safety Board before he retired, and that among the specific cases he oversaw was a bridge failure in the Philippines in 1998 caused by a clay lens formation under an eastern approach column, and that the remediation methodology he developed for that case became the standard international protocol for clay lens foundation correction. Dr. Chen said, "In my field, Arthur Cole is not a concrete inspector." He said Arthur Cole is the man who wrote the protocols that tell us what to do when something like this happens. Marcus Webb looked at the cracks in the wall of his building and looked at the city below through the glass and thought about a small notebook falling to the ground in front of 12 members of the labor crew and thought about the words, "I hope I am wrong." Arthur Cole arrived at the site 40 minutes later, still wearing his faded orange safety vest. He walked through the entrance past Marcus, who was standing at the edge of the site, and Arthur did not stop to speak to Marcus and did not look at him with satisfaction or with anger. He walked directly to Dr. Chen, shook his hand and said, "Show me the eastern columns." The 2 men walked into the building together. Marcus Webb stood alone at the site entrance and watched them go. The Centurion Tower construction was suspended for 11 weeks. The foundation remediation cost $14 million and delayed the project by 7 months. Marcus Webb's contract was terminated. Arthur Cole consulted on the remediation process for 6 weeks and then went home and told his wife that the building was going to be fine and that he was ready to be retired. Now she poured him a cup of tea and they sat in the kitchen and he looked out the window.